Well, on the 13th of September this year, President William Ruto took the reins of leadership for the next 5 years. Well, today it is exactly 90 days since President Ruto became the fifth president of the Republic of Kenya. We want to look back at what this new administration has achieved, the hits and the misses, and of course we're keeping an eye on what's in Washington. Remember, the US-Africa Leadership Summit is currently underway, where President Joe Biden is expected to host more than 50 African heads of states and government. And the question is, what is on the agenda? And this meeting is critical because it is coming at a time when China has just concluded what has been billed as one of the most important China-Arab summit. What are the implications of this? Is this another attempt by the US or by the Washington to try and counter the advancement of China on the African continent? Those are the geopolitics of all this. Good morning and welcome to the show. My name is O'Brien Kimani. This is News Check. We are live from Broadcasting House. At O'Brien Kimani is my Twitter handle. At KBC Channel 1 is our Twitter handle. This is News Check. Welcome to the show. Well, as I said, we just want to reflect on the first 90 days of President William Ruto's administration. We want to look at what exactly was promised, what has been achieved, what is pending, and what is the way forward. And I have a team of analysts in the house. This is Dr. Churchill Saoke. He's a governance expert and a lecturer at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Thank you very much indeed, Saoke, for joining me.
Thanks, O'Brien.
And of course, we have Torostol Alenga. He's a political analyst. Did I get your name right?
Yeah.
How did you end up with such a complicated name?
It's a long story. It's a long story. There were so many mics.
There were so many mics, eh? So, what about Dan?
There were so many too, so we needed some different ingredient.
Very good. So first of all, I want to hear your thoughts, first of all, Churchill, on something that I've just mentioned, the US-Africa Leadership Summit. President Joe Biden has invited about 52 head of state and government from Africa. What do you think is going to be the agenda in that meeting?
Okay, thank you. Thanks, O'Brien, and thanks for inviting me here. First of all, it is important to understand that there has been, every nation has been trying to see ways in which they can be able to have a share of the African continent's resources. And one of the ways in which most of these powers have tried it is through creating multilateral institutions or multilateral caucuses like the Africa-US Summit. China also has its summit with Africa, just as part of ensuring that they mobilize the African countries towards having a strong relationship with them for strengthening their trade and security in the country. Remember that in diplomacy we say that the world is very anarchic, and anybody can be able to take the power. And one of the ways in which you take power is by marshalling influence geopolitically and vertically. So this is part of what the US is trying to embed its influence in Africa. I think over the past few years, China has had a strong influence, especially in trade. And America is trying to come back, and we want to come back. And you remember during the previous administration, there was a strong focus on manufacturing. And because they wanted to bring manufacturing back to US, and since they had taken a lot of their manufacturing of their products to China, so they maybe part of the discussion in this trade is to negotiate how they can have stronger relationship with the African countries in terms of trade, in terms of security and things like that. And in the long run, you will find that with a strengthened trade, with a strengthened relationship on security, the US will then have more influence in the African continent.
Do you feel, or do you say like the US is coming back to Africa when time is too late?
Well, I don't think so. Maybe they're just coming to enhance and trying to, what I would say, solve the mistakes that have been made before. Because you see, one of the reasons why China was able to get entry into the continent was because they were able to bring their aid without so much conditions and restrictions. And so, on the other side, the US had a lot of restrictions on their trade and had a lot of conditions. And so, maybe as they come back to Africa, they are going to reevaluate their conditions and, you know, the way in which they have been engaging with Africa, so that they can counter the effect of the Rail and the Bet initiative of the Chinese, which has had a huge influence in Africa and across the entire Arab world.
Very well. Alenga, when you look at the trade between US and Africa, the two-way trade in 2019, it was about 45 billion dollars. Which areas do you see the two regions, you know, can advance their trade ties?
I think, Arben, the bigger conversation we should be looking at is the place of Africa in such discussions as the one that is happening in the US today. But for us to bring ourselves onto that table of discussion from a point of strength rather than a point of weakness is to first of all organize our domestic affairs in a proper manner, look at the continental focus on trade, industry, manufacturing, and even education and other very important sectors like health. Once we galvanize all this, and then we walk onto that table of negotiation or discussion as a strong principle, and with a strong willingness to plug into the international market. We first of all need to secure our own market in Africa. Africa has a very large population. It has about over 54 countries. So if we bring this together and deliberate a trade regime that brings all these countries together, we knock off our borders and trade independently with one another. So then when we are plugging into the international market, we are coming in as a voice, not as a dependent. There are also other attendant issues like the issues of climate change, and we must also organize ourselves around that in as much as we are advancing the conversation on manufacturing and industrialization. We should be asking ourselves, to this day, Africa remains the least contributor to climate change effects, emission of green gases and all that. But then Africa remains a very the one that pays the highest price for that, you know. And we have countries that are contributing a lot to the release of emissions, yet those countries still enjoy a place and time where they dictate to Africa what needs to be done. So we should now interrogate, while we are entering into these discussions, are we entering into these discussions to beg, or are we entering into these discussions for a multilateralism that works for Africa, that recognizes Africa as a contributing factor and therefore accentuates our competitive advantage rather than just advancing our begging hands? Yeah,
and you're bringing in a very interesting concept here, because remember in January last year, 2021, the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement came into force, bringing together close to 2.1 billion people in Africa and a combined GDP of about $2.6 trillion. And so how can Africa use this strength to leverage its position with Washington?
It is indeed a strength, but then what we should ask ourselves, with that GDP, is Africa performing optimally, or basically just a tip of the iceberg? So there's need for expansion of Africa trade, and there are so many other areas that we are still not tapped into. If you look at the trade between the UK and Kenya, basically Africa and the European Union and even the Far East and all that, there are some traditional commodities that we trade on these trade lines, you know. So there's need for diversity of trade, and then we can now tap into newer areas so that we expand that space gradually. Another question we will also want to interrogate is, by 2025, the AGOA is coming to an end. Has Africa prepared herself after the expiration of AGOA? What next? Because if we do not have a fallback plan that is turgid enough, then it means we will fall into every other trade agreement. We signed, I think, a year or 2 years ago, a year ago actually, the UK-Kenya Free Trade Agreement. Yep. After like a month or so, we also signed the US-Kenya Free Trade Agreement. But if you look at the details of that free trade agreement, there was so many things that were going to be detrimental to Kenya and also hinder now the growth of arrangements like the East African Community. Yeah. You know, so those are the attendant issues we need to examine adequately before we engage into discussion, so that we know what are the misses we could anticipate here and what are the gains that we could get here. But then how do we then optimize on those gains, you know, so that they close in the gaps that we are creating in our own spheres. But most fundamentally so is we need to work on a home remedy first of all.
And of course, okay, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Are saying that the fact that this meeting is being held in Washington under the invitation of President Joe Biden, America is having an advantage.
Yes,
because it is the one that is summoning, so to speak, and some leaders have been excluded from this meeting. And so how do we, or how does Africa go into this meeting, you know, in one tune and also from a point of equality?
That is an extremely concise statement. In negotiations, remember that this is diplomacy, and diplomacy is about negotiation. How do you craft a negotiating framework that gives you the best? And America and some of these developed countries have done this, and they're very good at it. And one of the ways in which they already have an upper hand, as you have well alluded to, is that have the discussions within your jurisdiction. And by that alone, you have already made your opponent or the person you are negotiating with to see you on an upper pedestal. So the African countries are already going to the US, seeing the US as the superior person. And they are going there with the begging hand. That's number one. And if it were not so, maybe they would have called China to the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa and told them that, you know what, we want to negotiate with you as the African Union. Come to us with your ministers or with your governors, and so that we can negotiate on the things that we can deal with together, trade and all security and things like that. The other second thing is that the moment these countries are going to the US, whenever they are negotiating, they are not going to negotiate as the African Union. Each country is going to survive. They're going to look for what is good for them. And so you will be having ministers of different countries going to meet different the Minister of Trade of the United States and negotiating what is best for them. So in other words, the United States has not only created an upper hand for its own negotiation, but it has also created a framework for fragmented negotiating power between different countries. So nobody is going to negotiate in the US and African Union. So in the long run, the US will have more gains out of that summit, because the trade minister of the trade secretary of the US will be able to negotiate with the trade of the different all the other 50 countries and see where they can be able to invest. Yet each of these countries will at least get some piece of some small thing or maybe some token. And this is how they do it. So America has already gone into this negotiation with an extremely upper hand. And I think, and as Torosted has alluded to, it is important that the African leaders begin to see how best can we leverage even on this big block of GDP, this block of market that you have stated. The only way is to go into the global trade as a single African bloc. And this is the biggest challenge.
You're also alluding to the fact that America has been approaching specific countries and luring them with a free trade area agreement. And one example is Kenya. And I remember when the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai was in town. She echoed what the former President Donald Trump had said, that the agreement that they are going to reach, or they are entering with Kenya, will be a model for other African countries, and it is going to act as a building block for other agreements with African countries. And so, out of that statement, you can clearly see that the U.S. is not ready to trade with Africa as a bloc, but they just want to go into specific countries and trade with them. And that is somehow likely to weaken the African continent. And Taurus, I want to ask you, how then do we as Africa wean ourselves from that exposure and come to the table as a bloc, as a people?
There's a very powerful statement that Dr. Churchill brought to the fore, and that is I think when I try to synthesize that, then it poses an indictment to bodies like the African Union. So you start to question what is the strength, where is the strength of the African Union, where is their mobilization power, and where is their independence as a modern organization of states that are standing alone and independent for that matter. So as long as we do not utilize the AU presence as meeting venues for the rest of the world, then we will always be entering into discussions from a point of weakness. So it starts by reinstating ourselves, and if there is a discussion, let's invite them to come and sit with us, because when you are the host, you have an upper hand in the discussion. Where I come from, they say when you are the guest, even if the music is nice, you dance while sitting. So when you go to the US, you will dance while sitting. So that's where it begins from, and that reinstatement of Africa's position as a primus inter pares in these discussions, first amongst equals, it comes through taming our greed as leaders of Africa. First of all, with a rampant and exorbitant expenditure of public funds, because you know for a fact these leaders take those planes not even to go and discuss Africa. They take it as a trip. So it is a trip to the US, it's another trip to Britain, it's a trip to Germany, and a photo opportunity with the President of the United States of America. So when we win ourselves of that simplistic greed that I just want to travel to the US, for instance, if you look at our situation here, we have our president is about 99 days in office today, right? And he has already done international trips in under 100 days. Kibaki did 33 trips in 10 years, 33 international trips in 10 years. By 2019, Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president, went to Barbados. That was his 100th trip. So if you go by that matrix, and you can determine now for yourself how many trips will this regime have gone for at the end of 10 years or 5 years, So if we cut on that, and then we reinstate ourselves as people that have a conversation, a story to share with the world, so we invite the world to us, then they can be able to come. And when they come around, that's the time we can take them to the Mau and show them what resource we have. We can take them to Masai Mara and show them what resource we have. But when we have the conversation from the comfort of their dining room, then it's difficult to articulate the African story and effectively pitch on the areas that we think we can do bilateral and multilateral ties.
I mean, we'll be touching on the issues of what is happening locally, and I'm glad that you have the numbers, of the trips covered by the three presidents. The current president, the immediate former president, and of course the former president, the late Mwai Kibaki. But before we go there, Is it your highly sought opinion that then this meeting between US and Africa should have been held in Addis Ababa?
I strongly believe that as a Pan-Africanist.
But do you think the US would want to hold that kind of a meeting in a headquarter that was constructed by China?
Because you see, it's politics. It's how do you get the best? How do you negotiate for what you want best? Because remember that within the global sphere, the United States is just one of the many countries that Africa can trade with. They can decide and join the UK and trade with the Commonwealth.
Yep.
They can decide and join the Arabs and trade with the United Arab Emirates. They can decide and join the Asian countries and trade with the rising tigers. Or they can join China and trade with the Chinese as they have done before. So it's about, are you ready to, this is what we have, this is how we want it, are you able to negotiate with us? So I think that it is a bad idea for Africa to begin to look at themselves like, it is either this country or nothing. The moment you go into negotiation with that kind of perspective or that kind of thinking, you're already losing it. So irrespective as to whether China is the one that built the headquarters in Addis Ababa or not, I mean, there are many other facilities that China built that we are having multilateral institutions. China goes into a meeting in the United Nations in New York, and even if they don't agree with the US, but they still have their representative there. So this is about interest, and it's about the African countries uniting together in one voice to advance the African interest. The only challenge, and most of the developed countries know this, that at any given point, it is very highly likely that the African countries will speak in one voice. You will already see it even in the election of the African Union Commission. The Anglophones will go this side and the Francophones will go this side. And they strongly know that at any given point it will be very difficult. And they then take advantage of that division and divide Africa into pieces.
And I want to draw you back to last year when China and US held their first bilateral meeting, and it was held in Alaska, and China was very specific to the US that you are not coming to this meeting from a point of authority. We are here as equal partners. And the meeting and that statement somehow infuriated the Americans to a point whereby the meeting was somehow recorded as a non-starter. Do you see a situation, Taurus told, where Africa can get to that point where they say, look here, we are coming, you're not coming to us, or we are not coming to you from a point of weakness, but we are coming as fair trade partners?
It can happen, and it must happen. That's an imperative of our time, and we must all work towards that. But then for it to happen, there are other antecedent issues that need to be furnished. Like, for instance, let us first of all speak in one voice. Like Dr. said earlier on, that when we go into these talks, definitely every African country is going with their different conversation. There's different things that Tanzania is bringing onto the table. Uganda has their own demands. Sudan has their own issues. We have our own issues. But the moment we come together and harness that capability that we have as a people, the Ubuntu spirit that distinguishes us as a people who are first of all societal, and we are good at coming together. So if we can harness on that and we come together for the common good of the continent, let us support what is happening in Ghana, let us support what is happening in Nigeria, let us pull together with South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, and the rest of Africa. So when we come together, we manage our resources, we have a common voice, we distinguish and demystify our competitive advantage advantage to the nations. That is the only time we'll be able to come and say we are coming into this onto this discourse as a fast among equals. But as long as we are still hidden in our small nations, in our small borders, we will continue to have different and at times objectives that clash with each other. Let's start with even our migration laws. Let's try to harmonize our migration laws so that it is easy for somebody to do trade from here to all the way to South Africa without getting into so many barriers. Let us kill the corruption that is on our border points, so that we have border points that are productive for us. We must always ask ourselves, border points must be treated prima facie as places of revenue, but we must not treat them as places of settling scores. We don't like this nation. The moment you get to the border, then now you face the wrath of that country because they just don't like you and you're a fellow African country. Let's pursue that common unity first of all, because as long as we stand alone in different with different flags, that knocks off the unity that we so need. Look at the European Union. They have managed to come together, and that is why when they go to these discussions, they go as the European Union. When they are seeking something, they are seeking for the entire European Union. You don't see one simple country standing out and making their demands in a particular manner while the other one has a different agenda. When you look at the growth of China influence in Africa, we must ask ourselves, what does it portend for the future? And how does Africa, instead of pinning themselves onto one trade block, how do we play around all the partners of development that exist on the table? It's not a crime to trade with China, but as we are doing that, can we pursue another line with Britain? Can we pursue another line with Oceania? Can we pursue another line with the greater Europe, so that it is a diversified approach that we have, not just a single line, so that you realize this country, maybe in the era of this particular president, they were for China. So you lock yourself there. And that is, I think it is thinning our opportunities on the table.
Yes, you wanted to say something.
And just to add on to that, one of the countries, the European Union is one of the regions that the United States has admitted over and over again that it's very difficult to negotiate with, and specifically because this is a region that have established themselves in a very strong way and go into global conversation in one voice. And one of the things that Africa could actually leverage upon and take advantage moving forward is issues to do with infrastructure. I mean, you look at how Europe is interconnected to an extent that you are able to move from one country to another. The moment you get into one country through even the Schengen, you're able to move into another country. It eases movement. Look at Africa. For you to go to Algeria or Morocco, you have to go outside Africa to come back to Africa. It beats logic. So infrastructure is something that is very important. The other thing is issues to do with just awareness of what products are available in Africa. I'm sure, for example, very few people know what Malawi has that Kenya can benefit from. So our intra-Africa trade is extremely poor. And if we do not have strong awareness of the products that are within and take advantage of them and say that, we cannot be able to import anything from China if we can get it from Africa. So until we reach that point, then it is needless for us to go even to Addis Ababa and make talks there.
You see, yesterday, the Deputy Commerce Secretary, Don Graves, for the U.S., said that, America has fallen behind in terms of its foreign relations with Africa, and now it is playing catch-up. Do you see America eclipsing China, whose trade with Africa is almost $230 billion US every year, Toros told?
I think trade is very dynamic. The factors that could accentuate Chinese trade for today will be totally different 5 years from now. But what is going to hamper or hinder the growth of the continuous growth of Chinese trade with Africa is the objective of the Chinese trade itself, and then secondarily, it's their loan regime, you know, because many countries are now walking away from the issues of loaning to development partnership, you know. So how do you pair with a certain country so that you act as trade partners rather than people who are just coming to get a grant or a loan to do a project? In the next few years, we're going to find a problem with many African countries that have dived into China for their easy money, having a problem paying these loans. Like even our own country, we are having a quagmire on the loans that we have with China, and much of that conversation has remained very hidden, that the common person does not even know what exactly is the issues around these loans. We have had conversations here and there, like every Kenyan being born today owes the China around 80,000 or so. But those are just grapevine conversations. We do not have the nitty-gritties of these discussions to understand exactly what is the depth and the length of those commitments. So once we are still in that period of you know, straining to even pay for the projects to pay back, then it will definitely at some point hinder the trade that is existing between China and Africa. Number two, when you look at that particular trade, when I said objectives, it was basically a way of China trying to outsmart America and maybe Europe, and try to show them, hey, we can also get here and make a fortune from here. So many times we say, do not start a business venture because you want to teach someone a lesson. You might end up teaching yourself the lesson. So that objective around that was more of a political objective than a trade and industry and commerce discussion. So that will definitely affect China in a way or another. And then when you look at the superfluous loaning of Africa, of China to Africa, it's definitely going to have an implication on these states, and different regimes will act differently to those negotiations that were done maybe their predecessors or so. But then when you look at the US and the UK and the larger European Union, their trade is something they have built for years, and it sort of has an underlying strategic plan that they have been doing for many years. So definitely for me, I see the China one looks rosy, but the sustainability is the question.
The sustainability is the question. Do you agree with him? That,
I totally agree. And also you'll see when you also look at in the overarching political ideology, you find that most of the African countries actually incline more to the political and economic ideology of the West. And so that is itself a strong anchorage for sustainability. And in terms of doing business, there is just to an extent to which some of the African countries can partner with China. Beyond their money, it can't. For example, if someone told you that, you know, we want to go the China way in terms of governance, in terms of thinking, nobody will think about that. Because we are more inclined into the West. So but
is it because of past colonial historical ties with the West that we are inclined to think that way?
Exactly. So,
but is that a good position?
It's an ideology.
But is it a good ideology?
That's something else to ask. But the fact is that it is what is influencing our politics. It is what is influencing our way of doing business. It is what is influencing our socialization.
Is it high time then we started looking at it critically and ask ourselves, ideologies, are they working for Africa? Can they work for Africa? And were they meant to work for us? And if the answer is no, then can we come up with our own ideologies that are made for Africa, crafted by Africans, and see whether it can work?
Yes, O'Brien, it's a very good thinking. And there has been conversation around this. Just how do we craft our development strategy to fit our context? These are conversations that have been had in scholarly levels and even within certain political discourse. And the challenges come and arise where you have this ideal thing that you want to achieve in terms of making Africa be what it should be and not what the West want it to be. But structurally and practically, it becomes very difficult because you realize that the reality is that it is already embedded within our systems. It is already embedded within everybody else is speaking the same language, that if you speak a different language, you are outcast.
Wow, interesting. The question is, can that situation hold forever? These are the kind of conversations we're having, world-class conversations here on the geopolitics of the day, what it means for us, what it means for the others, and what is the future. This is News Check. We are live from Broadcasting House, and of course, the conversation that we are coming to is the Kenya Kwanza scorecard. Remember, President William Ruto was sworn in on the 13th of September. Today is exactly 90 days since he came into office, and we want to look at the first 90 days, even as we inch closer to the much talked about the first 100 days of Ruto's administration. We want now to take you to the lake city of Kisumu, where our reporter Wycliffe Ketch wants to give us some views from the people down there on what they feel and think about the Ruto's administration.
Thank you so much, Brian Kimani, back in Nairobi. We are, of course, coming to you live from the lakeside city of Kisumu. Right where we are right now, this is the CBD. You can see business going on as usual, people just going about their businesses. And as we look at the Kenya Kwanza score, exactly 90 days today, when the Kenya Kwanza, under the leadership of His Excellency the President William Ruto, took office. And during that time, Kenyans were very high in expectations, and of course they had a lot of expectations regarding the high cost of life, and they expected the Kenya Kwanza administration to hit the ground running and actually do what they can to bring down the cost of living. And without much ado, Brian, I will engage two gentlemen here with me to help us understand what they think about the Kenya Kwanza administration in terms of their scorecard so far, as which is just about 10 days shy to hit the 100 days mark. Starting with Alfred, brother, if you can just come here and introduce yourself and tell us what is it that you can attribute to the Kenya Kwanza administration. Today marks exactly 90 days of the Kenya Kwanza administration in office. What is it that you have to say about their scorecard so far? First.
My name is Alfred. I'm a travel consultant within the CBD of Kisumu. My assessment so far, the Kenya Kwanza administration needs to do so much. For the 90 days which is lapsing, I can give them a scorecard of 30%. Reason being, Kenyans are still at where they were when they got the promises. And at the moment, we don't need any constitutional review. The government should concentrate so much on implementing, especially on the reducing the cost of living for the many Kenyans who are at the moment, some are sleeping hungry. So I think most of their efforts should be geared towards this achievement. Yes.
That's very right. And because when the Kenya Kwanza administration took the reins of power, there was a lot of expectations in terms of bringing down the cost of living. And from where you sit, what do you think during 90 days, has there quite been a change in the cost of living? What was the price of unga then, and what is the price right now? What can you say?
Well, when they took over, the price of unga was around 160, 140. So that is where we expected them to start from. However, at the moment, the price has even shot up to 200 shillings, which is beyond most of our reach. So I think the issue of food security, to my opinion, is not about reducing the cost of fertilizer. It is a long term, because if you reduce the cost of fertilizer and the rains fail, then you have not done so much to the farmer. So it is a long term. We have to treat the root cause why we don't have enough rain. If it is a matter of planting more trees, this will enable the climate to change so that we have enough rain to assist the farmers. So it is a long-term issue, not a short-term.
That opinion actually tallies, actually is in tandem with, if you listened to the president's speech yesterday during the Jamhuri celebrations, you had mentioned that the government will spearhead the planting of 15 billion trees, that is in at least 100 acres a piece of land, that is in a bid to increase the tree cover from the current 20% going forward. In your opinion, is that going to solve the whole scenario of climate change maybe as a long-term way to address the issue of food security?
Exactly, because the only problem we are facing now is climate change. So many people have affected the forest cover in our regions, so we don't have enough rain. So if we tackle this, either in the past we used to do it through schools, colleges, universities, and even it was a community affair where the chiefs involved the local villagers to ensure they plant trees within the region, which is not happening nowadays. If there is a legislation or there is an enforcement that ensures if you plant one tree or maybe 2 or 3 like that, we can move forward and then we can have a long term. Otherwise, we'll keep on talking about the issue of food insecurity 1 year to the other, but we are not treating the root cause. So I think the president was right in doing that, but ni mambo ya kusema na kutenda. Sio tu watu wanasahau.
I want us to stay on that issue of food security a while a bit. You see, at least 4 million Kenyans are now have been said to be facing acute shortage of food, and we've seen the government mobilizing resources to distribute relief food to the most affected people. Do you think this is the best way to go, and probably what more should the government do to alleviate hunger in the country?
Yeah, that is it is in the way short-term way of assisting Kenyans who are suffering from the hunger, because at the moment so many people did the planting and they didn't have good harvest, so we don't have enough food to cater for the number. And then our neighbors who are in the Trans Nzoia region, the government should buy a lot of maize from them, then they release it to areas where there are no food so that people can buy at a reasonable price. The price here 200, honestly, for a common person it is not an easy thing, for a family with maybe over 7 or 8 children. So the government should work a way of ensuring they buy from the farmers who have enough produce at a subsidized price to assist the regions which have not had a good harvest within a period of some time, when we are tackling the root cause of food insecurity.
Lastly, you mentioned that you rated the Kenya Kwanza administration in 90 days in office, you rated it at 30%. Why? How did you arrive at the 30%?
Because, you see, we calculate the percentage we rate the government on the GDP. Majority of Kenyans are still complaining on the same issues we voted Kenya Kwanza in. So on my rating, I have not seen so much. Even if they are giving themselves a scorecard, the scorecard should come from the Kenyan citizens, not the government itself. It is us to rate them, not them rating themselves. Yes, so on my side, I give a 30%. If they do much, maybe it can go to 35 or 40. Okay. Yeah.
All right, Alfred, we'll get back to you later on and get to see what you talk about. The 100 days come to elapse. Right now, O'Brien, I'm going to pick the mind of another gentleman here in the name of Alfred, Alfayo, yes. I'm going to give you this opportunity to introduce yourself, and also I'm going to pick your mind in terms of on the issue of fostering unity in the country. You see, a government is one of the universal factors that bring people together in the country. Tell us, what do you think about the efforts by the government so far in fostering unity? We've seen, you can comment on the composition of the government in terms of cabinet and other appointment into various appointive positions.
Thank you very much. My name is Alfayo Chiengongoro, a resident of Kisumu and also a activist of this Kisumu County. First and foremost, let me take this opportunity to congratulate the President of the Republic of Kenya. I'd never done that before, but being today is our President, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate him so much, having taken that opportunity to lead us as Kenyans. Number two, let us talk, when you talk of the unity, so far, I would love to say that the President of the Republic of Kenya has got the mandate.
Sorry, I think you're going to stand here probably to get a better view of what you have to say, right?
Okay. So far, constitutionally, the President has got the mandate to unite Kenyans, especially in terms of the appointments that were recently made. To me, it didn't follow up the Constitution, because Constitution requires that when he's doing the appointment, it must be an inclusive to all Kenyans. Like when he was doing it, when we see all this, it's only the two tribes that were given the appointment, almost like the Kikuyus and the Kalenjins. Those were the people who have benefited from this government of the Republic of Kenya.
But you see, in terms of, I'm not sure if that, what you're saying could be true, but then because I believe, you see in the cabinet, there's only a limited number of positions that could be, that are open for appointment, and we've seen that being distributed regionally. I don't know if there is more that the government probably could do.
To me, my take, we have almost 45 tribes in Kenya. The best the President would have done, and at least this one will be a challenge to him, he would have taken each and every community and given them one slot in his government. For example, the Ministry of Finance, he would have given maybe to Kikuyu when it comes to agriculture, Rift Valley, when it goes to maybe mining, coast, he would have distributed it equally. But due to the fact that we know that the slots are limited, constitutionally, we are allowed to have like 20 cabinet secretaries or 21. He would have tried to contribute, but not contribute it equally amongst every Kenyan citizen, especially into tribal.
Okay, fine. Let's just move away from the appointment thing and talk to us about what is your rating of the Kenya Kwanza government, 90 days in office. What's your rating of it?
So far, I would give them 20%. Yes. Because there is nothing so much they've done. What they're doing, they're still in the celebration mode. They're still celebrating their victory. Everywhere they go, they have not sat back and realized that the Kenyans need them the most. Because first and foremost, before the president was elected, as he was in his campaign mood, and even during his swearing in, the first thing he said immediately, he puts the Bible down. He will get back to work. He will embark to his office and call for Kenyans to come together, unite the Kenyans, and make sure that the Kenyans forge ahead and everything that was back, and we now forge ahead together.
You feel that is not done yet?
Not yet. It is not done yet. Yes, to me that is not done yet.
Right. The issue of the cost of living is quite big in the country right now. What do you think, what's your rating of the government in terms of addressing that issue?
The cost of living is something quite tricky for the government to solve so far. Number one, he has to reduce the cost of fuel, because that is the backbone of everything in Kenya. Because once the fuel is reduced, for example, so far the fuel we do it at 175. The mistake he did the other time, he just moved 1 shilling from 175 to be 174, 175. I think that is the major challenge that he should do. Let him bring down the cost of fuel to 110, where it normally used to be, and then everything shall go back to normal.
Okay. Question for you, probably, what is it, you've mentioned that the things that probably the government hasn't done right. What do you think the government has done right so far?
So far, something that they haven't done right is the issue of introducing the GMO to Kenyans. The GMO is an issue and a thorn of the flesh to Kenyans. That is an issue that we as Kenyans, we should come out in totality and reject it to the terms possible. We normally used to survive without the GMOs. It should encourage the agricultural production in this Republic of Kenya. And to me, when I talk of this, I just heard recently the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya talked of the selling of all the maize into stores to the government, upon which they were given 3 months, upon which if they fail, the GMO will be brought into Kenya. I would love to disagree with him and tell him that let them promote the agriculture in Kenya, especially the Rift Valley area. Let them distribute food also to the so-called drought-prone areas. You see our people are dying day in, day night. We have like 4 million people are suffering from drought. Let them all focus into these areas so that these areas should also not realize the issue of hunger that we are facing as Kenyans. Secondly, in the terms of insecurity, we would love to see the government addressing this issue of insecurity, not only in Nyanza, not only in Central, but more so into the North Rift areas, whereby we have big challenge of insecurity. Just recently, you heard of the Minister for Interior. That
if you may wind up here.
The Minister for Interior, Professor Kindiki Kithure, he said that this will be a thing of the past. But so far, we heard of recently whereby the chief was killed, so many people were killed in Baringo County. These are the things and issues that they should come and address amicably to the Republic of Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alfaya Ongoro. Brian, those are some of the sentiments from the residents of Kisumu, even as we look at the scorecard of the Kenya Kwanza administration, 90 days in office. You've heard them mention that in as much the government has been trying to bring down the cost of living, they need to put more, the government needs to put more effort to ensure that those people that are hunger stricken actually are alleviated and supported in the best way possible. Also, the issue of insecurity also featuring prominently in their sentiments. Just those are some of the sentiments from the residents here, and of course this is a continuous conversation of Brian. On that note, I'm going to hand it back to you in studio so that you can continue continue that discussion in studio. O'Brien.
Wycliffe, thank you very much indeed, coming to us live from the city of Kisumu. And the weather there, I must say, looks quite beautiful because it's been raining the whole morning here in Nairobi. We wish you all the best there in Kisumu. These are the kind of conversations we are having here. We are live from Broadcasting House. This is News Check, not Bees Check. Now we are taking a short break, and thereafter we'll be right back now to analyze Ruto's first 90 days in office. Stay right here.
Make transactions anywhere in the world with the NCBA Visa card and stand a chance to win big. Join the FIFA World Cup 2022 when you win an all-expenses-paid trip for you and your +1 to watch 2 games. Or win exciting weekly prizes that will make your FIFA viewing experience super duper. All it takes is a tap to pay 2,000 Kenya shillings or more with your NCBA Visa debit or credit card. The more you swipe or tap to pay, the higher your chances of winning with 1 point for every 2,000 Kenya shillings spent. Don't miss out. NCBA. Go for it.
Kupata Waibrania kama skiza tune yako, bonyeza *811 *817 hash.
Yesu Kristo ni yule yule, jana, leo na hata milele. Wahibrania 13 mstari wa 8.
Kupata Waibrania, bonyeza *811 *817 hash. *811 *817 hash.
Karibuni sana, karibuni. Niwauzie?
Ugali matumbo batia mimi.
Ugali matumbo!
Nilikuwa nataka kaomena na kadoma.
customer, usijali chakula yako dili yako tu.
Maisha yako, mapendeleo yako. Tunukiwa na Safaricom. Chagua bei yako ya kupigia simu au data. Piga *444# au utembelee My Safaricom app upate deal poa ya kupigia simu. Uongee zaidi au upload zaidi.
Nataka chapati na crips.
Mala sausage. Nataka ugali na
Welcome back. You're watching us live from Broadcasting House. This is News Check with me, O'Brien Kimani, and political analyst Toros Taj Alenga and Dr. Churchill Saokia, governance expert and lecturer from the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. We are tracking the global happenings, not only how they impact the world, but how they impact us. But now we want to come back to the country and, of course, look at how the first 90 days of Kenya Kwanza administration, whether they have managed to fulfill the pledges they made. I want to start with you, Torostal. When you look at the last 90 days of President William Ruto, what conclusions do you draw?
I think it's pretty early to fairly judge the Kenya Kwanza administration. Putting so many things into perspective and contextualizing the whole thing. Number one, this was a transitional election from one regime to another, but we cannot take away the fact that President William Ruto had been part of the previous administration. Clearly, he knew the corridors, where to go and where the lights are, to switch on and illuminate the room. So and then also we had the controversy around the election, which took us into the Supreme Court and all that. So that also ate into his time of settling down. And then we had issues that were plaguing the country, like insecurity in most of the pastoralist regions. We had drought and famine in most parts of in about 23 counties. So there was a lot to settle down to. However, there are a few things that may have actually happened by now, and based on those things, then we can actually evaluate the administration and say what direction we are going. For the first 90 days, we have seen a lot of things happening in the space. Number one, which I want to really appreciate, is the announcement that the president made yesterday, that there are plans to grant statehood to the Pemba community. Lived in the country for many years, many decades, without being nationalized as citizens of the country. In this time and age, we should not be having a community being disenfranchised in terms of getting basic services because of their specialness. And I implore the president to extend this even to the Nubian community, the Pare community, and many other stateless communities, so that they also join the Shona community that was recently granted their status as citizens of the country. So when we look at that's a very good thing that has happened. And then we look at other issues like what the president promised in his manifesto. And the biggest question today we are asking ourselves, or rather I'm asking myself, is where did the Kenya Kwanza manifesto go to? Because if you have listened to the president since he took over, and even culminating to yesterday, the president has actually given us new promises. So there is one manifesto, we have not touched them. On top of that, we are being added more promises, until some Kenyans on social media were saying the president should actually have a docket for promises, the one that specifically handles. There should be a CS for promises.
I just want to re-emphasize what you have said, that it is still too early to rate the performance of Kenya Kwanza administration. That is a fact of the matter. I think in about 3-4 years' time, that will will be adequate time for Kenyans to sit back and say, so far this has managed, we have managed to do A, B, C, D. But we can gauge it based on what was promised in the first 100 days, and that's what I want us to alienate ourselves around.
Exactly.
One of the issues that President Ruto promised Kenyans in his first 100 days was the reduction in the cost of living. Churchill, do you feel that has happened?
Well, I think, well, I also agree that it's also too early to give a scorecard to the president because of the time. And but then also when we look at the first 100 days, some of the promises that may have been made by the Kenya Kwanza administration, remember that politicians at the time when they are always campaigning, they'll always give every extraneous promises to ensure that they win the votes from the people. And they are never really into thinking of how some of these promises are going to be implemented when they take the reins of power. And this is one of the challenges that I think the administration is facing, because, you know, there are a lot of promises that may have been given, and it gave Kenyans a lot of high expectations. And, you know, to an extent that some of them, like, for example, the cost of living, I mean, it was not possible for however genius you may have been to reduce the cost of living immediately within the first 100 days, considering the circumstances upon which the cost of living in Kenya was rising. It was a global issue. And I think this is one of the things that may have been should have been appreciated by the politicians at the time of the campaigns, so that you don't put a cap within the first 100 days, because it's impractical. And you know, the other thing that I find, you know, which also has made people also less expectant, is also maybe even the whole concept of the whole government, which is the hustler. You know, there was a lot of expectations of people that, you know, this is a hustler government. A hustler government, in the imagination of people, there are those who thought that this is a freebies government, which is not practical, you know. So how people perceived it and how it practically possible did not converge. And that is one of the challenges that I think the president is trying to really try to achieve what people expect of him and the reality of what is possible. It is not possible. He realized that, you know what, for you to reduce the cost of living, you needed to put some subsidies, like what was already there for the fuel subsidy and even the education subsidy. And how do you ensure that, where do you get this money for subsidy? You have to ensure you generate these finances somewhere. So I think the problem is that we overpromised and put an impractical timeline for some of these promises, and so we realized that when we got into power, we cannot achieve them within the timelines that we had given.
I'll be coming back to you on that issue of the reduction or the easing of cost of living, because it's a multiplication of issues, and some of them may be outside of our control as a country. But you see, for President Ruto to deliver on his manifesto, on his promise, I mean, he needs a team of technocrats, of bureaucrats, you know, that will help to craft, you know, an ideal agenda that will help him deliver his promises to Kenyans. Taurus Stoltz, when you look at the team that Ruto has crafted, from the cabinet to the PSAs to the board chairs and other appointments, are you convinced that that team is best suited to deliver on his promises?
I think that is where the problem began, because ideally, if you look at President Ruto as a person,
why are you saying problem began?
He's this man with a very big vision. He's a hands-on person. He pushes. He doesn't take no for an answer. And then conversely, you look at the team that is supposed to listen to his dreams and articulate them and run with them on a day-to-day basis. Most of them are politicians, some of them who lost elections, so they have just come to redeem themselves, consolidate money, vie again. So those are not the right people to sit down and understand and roll out your plans. I think, and again, if you look at it from the backdrop of everything that had happened, he had no choice, because those are the people that stood with him. You have to sort of take care of them after you have gotten to. So it's really a tricky situation to find yourself in as a state in an African country, because there are people who have helped you, and you have to say thank you to them. So for most of these people, it's just basically the president is thanking me for the support I gave him. It's not really taking it to that level of, now we have won an election, we have a country to drive, and we have this agenda to drive. So chipping on to Daktari's point, we had a lot of promises, and then the framework is a bit unrealistic, and we have to sit down and figure out things properly now. What happens? Because that era of standing on the podiums, on top of vehicles, and treating people to vote for you is long gone. Now we have a president. Even to those who did not support the current president, now he's our president, and we must all work together for a common good and for a country called Kenya. You know, that is what now is the most important imperative at the moment.
But when you say that, the appointment is where the president started getting it wrong. Which team would you have preferred to see in office, or who would you have preferred to be picked? I mean, I don't want you to mention names, yes, but what caliber of people?
You see, our constitution is very clear on the composition of the cabinet. We went from the dispensation of the older constitution, where we were getting the cabinet from politicians, and we said we are going to now invite in technocrats who have the technical know-how of different fields they are handling. And then another conversation came in. These technocrats do not understand the ground. It is the politicians who are there every day. They are the ones who know the needs of the people. So we clashed there. But then two wrongs don't make a right. So we had a clear guide from the constitution on who can make into the cabinet. Ideally, it was the constitution was envisaging a moment where we can actually apply to be cabinet ministers. The CS can actually apply, but then we rolled it down on appointment, so that is where we got it wrong. So it's really difficult, and I think it's going, unless we are salvaged by a characteristic of President William Ruto that I know, that is, he's a really hands-on person. So if, pray you me, he drives in that fiat so that these guys can actually work.
But you also realize we have technocrats and bureaucrats who are politicians, and the constitution never meant to lock them out.
Exactly, but in our context, when somebody has become a politician, everything else fades off. Even if it is somebody you knew, this one was a professor of mathematics, or he was a religious leader, they sort of change. They just take on to the politics, and it's all. We have a
seeing it from the lenses of a politician.
Even in the structure of in the elected leaders, we have those who are even bishops. Do they still preach? They don't. So that is how it happens. We needed people that can actually even be summoned to the National Assembly and answer questions, so that they don't tell us they have other engagements. You see, even right now, we are having a speaker of the National Assembly who participates in political campaigns, But so once you have this mix of politicians, and the space becomes very thin for people to actually roll out what they understand, disciplines they understand, like agriculture, like trade and industry. You need somebody that can push that agenda. They can write those papers. They can, from a point of neutrality, present it to the nation and say, this is what I think, this is where we should go as a country. But now, when we put in the political interests, the whole conversation of the leadership of the cabinet disappears, and we just remain with politicians who are maybe propping themselves for the next election, and there the whole objective gets lost. But we must also interrogate another thing, which is the structure of the regime of the current president. much of the things or the promises that the president gave to the country are promises that are rolling out from a budget perspective. And once we have this budget, then that is where corruption usually comes in, misuse of public funds usually comes in, and then you also get the wrong officers, so that even if we are rolling out Hustler Fund, for instance, you find after 2 years, if you take it all, this money has not reached the real hustlers that you wanted to elevate in the society. So that is really, I think much of what we see today would have been structuralized. It is a structural empowerment of the people. It's not really a budgetary empowerment. I'm giving out this money. I am injecting this money here, so that we work on a project, so that we say we are giving ourselves maybe 5 years. From these 5 years, this project will have grown to this extent, and the country will be at this particular point. So this one of ours is more of a freebie, and the sustainability platform around it is really weak. So, and then I think many of the things that the president promised, there are so many, and I'm thinking, we still have time. Can we collapse these things to maybe 4 fundamental things that ail this country, and we say, let's fix these 4? So that the president comes back to us.
There is an argument that is being fronted that so far Ruto has formulated or has formed 2 very important and critical teams that will guide his investment and his economic ideals. And is the Council on Economic Affairs. The other one is the Investment Council, which he had hunted some of the best brains we have around, economists, trade expert, and so much. And so there is a feeling, and there is a thinking that this is a team that will craft Ruto's economic agenda, investment ideas, which will be cascaded down to the person at the lowest of the ladder. Do you think this argument holds any ground?
You see, when you look at when the former president, the late Mwai Kibaki, came into power, he established quite a team that helped him to come up with
the National Economic and Social Council.
Economic and Social Council came up with the Vision 2030. And so we are already in a regime or in a country that has got sort of an economic blueprint that will help us to steer our country into a middle income and into a faster country. So we are not coming from a point where we are in vacuum. So preceding regimes have had this advantage of that blueprint, and so theirs is just to create mechanisms of implementing their agenda around this framework. And when you look at how Kibaki actually implemented this development, everything was around that Vision 2030. And it was cascaded so much up to the lowest level of institutions. You could see Vision 2030 blueprints almost everywhere, even in primary schools. And so even with this council, the Economic and Investment, expectation is that there are already frameworks that have been established, and theirs is now to advise maybe the president on, maybe which are the priority areas of how do we implement these things. But I still strongly believe that as on the sustenance, as a country, there is need for us as a country to begin to see the significance of entrenching bureaucracy and specifically intellect, technocrats within our government structures. We must reach that point.
Do you feel it is missing?
I still believe it is. We must reach that point where we believe that even at the political level where we have the cabinet secretaries, there is a very strong rate of technocrats within the permanent secretaries. But you see, at the cabinet secretary level, these are the people that the politicians, they are the people who give the political image of ministries and things like that, even going out there to negotiate. Are you able to have people who will go to negotiate in the United States and see value for what Kenya needs and not value for what the money that they're going to get in their individual selves? So that technocrat aspect is very significant in the sustainability of the governance of our country. And Kibaki himself really leveraged upon that, and that made him to benefit a lot. I have a lot of, for example, I got a lot of expectations of the current CS for finance, because, you know, he was
Professor Ndwando.
Exactly, because he was one of the biggest brainchild, all the other faults aside, but he was one of the other very key strong driver of Kibaki's regime of on the economy. And these are the kind of brains that, you know, the president could leverage upon. And if he has as many of these people as possible, even some of those economic councils and investment councils that he's coming up with will become meaningless.
And I like the fact that you have talked about you know, the appointment of Professor Njogun Ndongo, who is widely recognized as a man behind the high financial access in Kenya, and he's renowned as a man when it's as a great man when it comes to micro economic management, as well as monetary and physical formulation issues. So when you have this kind of a person, you know, at the helm of economic and financial formulation, policy formulation, then do you expect anything is to go wrong?
I expect him to deliver, because this is someone who is coming not with a political capital. You know, he is coming not because he has some political backing, but all he has is to deliver for His Excellency the President, and to deliver on the mandate. And, you know, these are people who are able to tell maybe even the President, you know what, we promised this, but it's not possible. Or the people want the Hustler Fund to be free of charge, but it's impractical. It's not sustainable. We have to craft something that is sustainable. And you know what? The politicians will ordinarily want to go with what people want. But what people want is never what can work for government. It's not what can drive a nation.
Yep.
You need somebody who can take that populism and that popular idea and bring it into a technical state and become implementable into a sustainable program that then drives the country forward.
And one of the promises that President Ruto made was the rollout of a fund dubbed the Hustlers Fund that will be given to small and medium enterprises to help them drive their businesses, to help them with cash flow. This has actually happened, even though it is coming at a cost. Why do you think there was a turnaround in terms of lending these funds for free, and now it is being given at an interest rate of 8% per annum?
I think there's no free lunch. So it's just for the hustlers would have actually understood that this fund will have an implication, and also the issue of doing it like a loan so that you have to repay incentivizes the recipient therefore to work with this money, because they know if I have borrowed 500 shillings, I need to repay it in this particular period of time. So if I don't put it to good use, then at the lapse of this period of time, I will not have some surplus to pay with. So that is pretty good. But my concern about the Hustler Fund is the legal framework around it. You know, I have the question of that million shillings, where did it come from? You know, what vote head did it come from? And where was it deliberated? Because we understand even CDF or National Government Affirmative Action Fund and all the other kitties that are available, they all pass through the parliament. The parliament discusses them, and then they set the limit of maybe this is what is available. Treasury also confirms what is available. So this money that was just thrown into the economy, 50 billion, where did it come from? And what are the other mechanisms around the fund? And there's also another introduction of something that was said, like if you borrow, there's a percentage that is now deducted for your own savings. So what are the procedures of reclaiming these savings when maybe after 5 years I want now to get my savings that was being shelved away for me. Where do I go to? Which office do I apply? Do I go to? How do I, what are what is the DIY around the whole thing? So there are questions that need to be answered, and the way our governments do things, they shroud everything in mystery so that even the good things are, you suspect them. Like somebody says, in Kenya, we are used to things being wrong, so that when they are right, you ask what is wrong.
but so okay, what Torstead is raising, I mean, is something that a lot of people are asking. But do you see this as a case of that the proverbial case of putting the cart before the horse, as you try to figure out on how to put the horse to where it belongs?
First we must appreciate one of the promises that the country was really long waiting for, and many of the people who voted the Kenya Kwanza were upbeat about the Hustler Fund, because it's actually the signature. It's the signature of the Kenya Kwanza government. And so, the president was actually sort of in under pressure to ensure that he brings these into fore. And so maybe the frameworks may have been missed, and there are a few misses out in terms of how do we roll out these, because it just needed to bring out these, bring out a fund that, this is one of the signature promises that I had made during my campaigns, and I'm already delivering it. And so that could be one of the misses. And so in the long run, you end up missing the sustainability, the legal regime, and all these other things that is being raised by Torstead. And many Kenyans have also seen it. And of course, I have also expressed and asked myself as an individual where I come, where I sit, is that what did Kenyans really expect of the Hustler Fund? This is a question I have not gotten, and I continue to ask Kenyans, did they expect a free fund? And how sustainable can a free fund be? How many people can a free fund fund? So I don't know what people really expected, but I think it's because of the overpromise that was given that raised the expectations of people that this would be free, to an extent that if an interest was brought, it then made people to begin, and maybe people expected big money, like 50,000, 100,000 and things like that. So when you began giving them 500 and 800, they felt, this is like, Fuliza is better. I think those are expectation issues and also sustainability issues which the fund managers need to look on and see how to make it better as they advance it, so that they see how they can make it reach the aspiration.
Can we for a moment, look at the brighter side of the Hustlers Fund, even as we grapple with the issues of the processes and legal position of the same? Let's have a look at, first of all, the impact this fund has had on our economy. And I was just looking at the latest numbers where the PS for, the CS for cooperatives and micro small enterprises was saying that close to 8 billion shillings has so far been lent to small and medium enterprises. What is the impact of 8 billion shillings being given to small enterprises? People who people who wake up and they go to Wakulima market, they buy a stock of 3,000 shillings, 4,000 shillings, they come, they sell, they get, that is their cycle.
One of the immediate impacts will be there is money in circulation. That is one of the immediate impact.
What we call the broad money supply.
There was no 8 billion within the economy that is now being circulated within a multitude of people within. So sort of it empowers the people to have buying power. And the advantage is that is happening when the value, we have not introduced new notes that we can say that the shilling is reducing. So that's one of the advantage of this. And the government should actually do much more, so that especially, and I think they already had started the issue of even trying to pay for some of the pending bills. That's one of the, those are some of the initiatives that they should even focus even much more. Other than this, it makes the circulation of money be increased within the economy, which then adds value and make people have more buying power and be able to cushion themselves from the high cost of living.
Torostad, I mean, do you think the small businesses are really concerned about the legal processes of setting up the Hustlers Fund? Aren't they more concerned about whether they can access this fund and on their businesses?
You know, for the sake of our viewers and the progress of our country as one that has deep anchorage to the rule of law, we must tell our viewers that if it offends the law, it is wrong. So it doesn't get better because it solves some particular issue. And then getting back to the question of how effective it has been, I think it is difficult to actually determine whether the Hustler Fund has been effective or not. You know, the Hustler Fund is being dished out by the government, and data around it is being supplied by the same government. So there's a biasness that doesn't give us a true picture of how things are. I wish the government would have engaged an independent firm to try to find out the effectiveness of that firm. But again, it is too early to do that. And then when you look at what particular demographic was targeted in that fund, then the question arises, does this fund go to the real demographic that was anticipated in the fund? Does it really go to the hustlers, or it is maybe Churchill and I can actually dial *254# and we contribute for our mzinga on weekend, and then we plan how we will pay back on Monday. So those are the issues that need to be demystified. Is it really going to the real target? And then what was the intention? The intention was to start and to support small businesses. Is it really being there? So the government has a bigger task to maybe engage some researchers or sort to find out this, because if it does engage in that particular research and we find that a good percentage, even say 50% or 60%, that has been effective, then this will be a very good thing to even develop further, to expand further, and it will attract more budget and even other partners to come on board. Yeah. So it's a good thing that we do an objective research around it, so that we see, because it is one of its kind.
There seems to be a consensus that number one, the Hustlers Fund was a masterstroke of a genius. I mean, it's a brilliant idea. It can revolutionize, you know, the money circulation in this country, that can help people that are struggling with small businesses, you know, to get a kickstart. But the issue of the processes, the management of the fund is what people are raising questions around. And how then do we disentangle ourselves from that mess and ensure that the intended purpose of the Hustlers Fund is achieved and the targeted audience get these resources?
I think there is need to have first a legal regime that safeguards this fund, and then two, so this legal regime of course will establish the engagement operation of around this fund, and also two, it will be important to also educate the populace as to, you know, the intention of this fund, who should take this fund and for what purpose. That education is very significant. And, you know, for example, if you are, you know, like for example, you find there are people who are in businesses and they want some finances, and they go there and you know, somebody is having maybe a shop whose asset base is maybe 20,000. And he's going there to get financing, and he finds that the cap for him is 800 shillings. I mean, that money does not make sense to him. So I think that the moment we'll reach the point where we are able to educate people on the target of this fund in terms of your cadre, if for example you are a person who owns a shop of 10,000 shillings asset base and you want more financing, are you eligible and to what extent? These are things that need more education of the people, so that you know, you end up having a fund that meets the expectations of the populace. One thing that we must admit, and you have alluded to, is that this was a genius idea. It is one thing that actually united a big percentage of the country, because most of the people around the country, somehow they say they are going to hustle. When you wake up in the morning and you meet a friend, and he'll tell you that, you know what, I'm going to hustle. This is my hustle. So this was one idea that actually united the country in a big way, and therefore the implementation of this fund will, in an objective manner, in a clear manner, will help meet the expectations of millions and millions of Kenyans.
Let's also look at the issue of the affordable housing, which the president has been very, very passionate about. And now he's saying that the government will now strive to help in the construction of 250,000 units per year. I first of all want to hear from you, Torostol. Is this achievable, number one? And number two, for it to be achievable,
I think affordable housing is achievable. The specific number given per year is not achievable, because that means you'll have to construct around 750 houses a day. Actually, you're the mathematician. Yeah, it's about 750 houses a day. So it's clearly not possible unless we will employ some magic strength. However, the real issue about affordable housing is, tell us what is the minimum unit we can get, If it is a 2-bedroom house is the minimum, or a 1-bedroom house is the minimum, that's fine. And then number two, we go to what is the average monthly payment?
Yep.
Then once you get the average monthly payment, then you ask yourself, well, maybe I am 40 years old.
Yep.
So if I'm paying, let's say, 2,000, I'm being deducted 2,500 per day, per month. So how many years will I need to clear my mortgage with the government? And as we know, around the mortgage law and all that, is that when you defer, then the property shall be seized. And it doesn't matter up to what point you had paid. So if you solve those details around it, then citizens can now decide based on the working years they are remaining with and what is their average income, are they able to get onto this product. But as it were, it is a very fantastic project, and it will go a long way in changing the country and giving people, especially those who could not dream of owning a house, the opportunity to do so. But even as we do so, we must now make it clear to them that when you go home, when you retire, you can now choose, am I a target market for this product?
Yep.
Because I foresee a situation where many people will plug into this, and maybe somebody has around 15 more years to work. That repayment of that mortgage will not work. So when you now retire and you can no longer furnish this mortgage, what happens to you? Do you become homeless? So those are the nitty-gritties that need to be fixed.
But when you look at it, when you try to analyze the concept of the Kenya Kwanza's affordable housing concept vis-a-vis the one for Jubilee or Uhuru Kenyatta, you don't see much difference. I mean, it's only a little bit of tweaking and retweaking of some few policies, and then seeing whether it can work. Do you see us, first of all, getting to a point whereby, as a country, we can deliver 250,000 units, and according to the mathematics that you have done, you're talking about 700 houses, per day, and of course, I mean, it's doable. China, can do 100,000 units of houses on a daily basis. But what do we need to do, bearing in mind that we are not China?
Well, I think that it's first we have to admit that this is one of the projects that that the current administration has taken over from the previous one, and it's continuing on with it. And I think it's going to be pretty easy for it to, because there are no other new regimes or newer frameworks or newer policies that need to be brought into place. You only need to move on from what the previous regime had, where the previous regime had left. As you could see, the former PS could be able could take the President Ruto across some of the projects that have already been completed and launching some of those projects and telling them the ones that are in progress and things like that. So I think that with that kind of mindset, you find that it's something that is something that is highly achievable. In the, in this kind of, when you're looking about infrastructure development, this is one of the areas where you can't be as ambitious as you can.
Yeah.
You are allowed to be as ambitious as you can, and the more ambitious you are, the more you draw, even attract partners to join you and help you. And the other advantage is that this is one of the promises that the populace, especially those who voted for President Ruto, do not really have a lot of expectations. So, the president is not too much under pressure. Because, each and every person, when you get a job, you are looking up to getting your own house.
Yeah.
So he's not really under undue pressure to ensure that he fulfills and even meet that number that he had promised. So I think that's the advantage around this promise. So he can be able still to drive it, but not necessarily, he's not obliged to achieve that number that he had.
And something else that we have seen is that actually, and this is a declaration, a directive he issued, during his swearing in, was that the cost of fertilizer was supposed to be slashed by half to 3,500. I mean, that announcement was made at a time when the country was facing massive drought. Do you think that has had any impact, and do we really need to reduce the cost of fertilizer in this country, or we need to invest more in irrigation projects?
I think the issue about subsidy fertilizer was a good decision at the wrong time, because outrightly during that period of time we were having very little rains across the country. There was famine, there was drought and hunger and starvation, and then into this starving population, into this hard, dry, cracking ground, you put fertilizer. For what purpose, And then we need to revolutionize or relook our agricultural methods, and also agriculture as a means of feeding the nation and as a means of providing revenue for the country through agribusiness and all other ventures. So importantly so is the need to diversify our agriculture so that we have diversity of crops. We have diversity of farming methods that map to each particular region based on their environmental issues. We have extension services, agricultural extension services. We have research in agriculture being empowered, entities like ILRI, CALRO being empowered so that they come out and answer questions pertaining to agriculture effectively. And so by so doing, then you wholesomely address the issue of agriculture, other than just picking on it piecemeal into things that may not really map and close the gap that exists effectively. But as I pointed out earlier, most of the issues that the president puts forward to solve the problems we are in are always budgetary issues, and that's where I have a problem. It's always budgetary, and we know our imprudence with money in this country. So then today, if you sent out a research, if you commissioned a research to find out, did the subsidy fertilizer reach the farmers? Have put into use? Are we anticipating a bumper harvest as a result of that? Those are the things that you now inform the government in knowing what works and what doesn't work. So we should actually have a government that engages a lot in research. Let's build up research centers that can be able to map resources and inform us effectiveness of the strategies that we are using, so that going forward we don't just do things because we think this is the right thing to do, but we base on a particular epistemic society that has informed us this is what works, this is what does not work. And that is why Churchill said earlier that there is need for us to have more of these technocrats who can inform. But then when those technocrats and politicians will always have their day. And the technocrats, sometimes most of them are not really used to the politics around things, and they will give up. They will say, I have given you the document, I have stated what we can do, that's fine, you can push it from there. But then after that, the populistic chants will carry the day, and we will go back to the drawing board. So our agriculture needs a complete overhaul, so that in the end, agriculture pays, and agriculture employs, and agriculture feeds.
And you're talking about an industry or a sector that contributes almost 25% to Kenya's GDP, every annually. And during the crafting of his manifesto, promised to invest more in agro-processing. And for you to invest more in agro-processing, then you must have a very strong production sector. We have heard the president say that there is a plan to construct 100 dams. Is there synergy in those two promises?
I think that the first thing that I will advocate for is, one of the most important things for a country is food security. If people are able to eat food, as irrespective of whether it is processed or not, they are able to be full. That is the security that a nation needs, other than the other physical security that is done by the KDF and health. And I think we have for a long time depended too much on rain-fed agriculture, where we plant our maize during the seasons, and if the seasons are altered a little bit, we begin blaming the droughts and the gods. And so we may need to get to the point where we are able to harvest water through those dams and use the water that we are harvesting in the dams for irrigation purposes, so that we are able to have food here. For me, this is one of the most practical ways and immediate ways in which we can salvage our food security in our country. The question around planting trees and to help drought is good. It's good, it will solve climate change, but that is a long-term strategy. It's an extremely long-term strategy. The immediate short-term strategies for us to collect all these waters. Today you have seen how it has showered and the waters are going into the drains. Then soon we are going to have drought, and again we'll be crying to our gods. Yet we had a chance to collect all this water and use this water for what? For irrigation purposes. So this is for me one of the things that I will strongly advocate for. And the other thing is that we need to create a mechanism that promotes the farmers. Because not until a farmer in Kitale sees that there is value in producing maize, then we are doing nothing. Today you talk to a typical farmer in Kitale and in Trans Nzoia, they'll tell you that, it's needless to waste your time planting maize. You rather wait for the maize that come from our neighboring countries and do business with it. That's a very dangerous. We must find ways of promoting our local production and our farmers to see value in putting their money in their agricultural products.
The other issue that has generated a lot of conversations and talks is government's lifting of the ban on GMO. A ban that has been there for the last 10 years. The jury is still out on whether this was a good or a bad decision, but I want to hear from you. Was this the right time to lift that ban? And as a country, do we really need to go the GMO way?
I have always suggested that our governments should be governments that speak with the people rather than speak to the people. So the issue around GMO would have been better handled if the government had a conversation with the people to iron out the nitty-gritties around GMO.
Yeah.
As it were, GMO as it has been sold to Kenyans is like Kenyans have that ordinary Kenyan has an imagination that it is maybe something that is going to be developed in a lab, that they are going to, that is not even a plant, it's artificial, and they want to feed me on it. But actually DNA, the GMO in its true sense is, you know, like if you take, like, let's say for example, grow in Kajiado where there's little rain. So the scientists will take that cactus and study what particular gene on the structure of cactus allows it to grow in Kajiado where there's no rain almost the whole year, so that they take that particular genetic capability and paste it on a maize gene, so that they enrich that maize, and then now these maize seeds can actually be grown in Kitui, and they will grow to fruition even with minimal rain, so that that particular gene that was in the cactus responds now to these conditions where the maize crop is being grown. So to this end, then I suggest I would have really liked a situation where the government would say they have lifted the ban on GMO. However, they are allowing our research organizations to develop those crops here and give those seeds to farmers so that our farmers can grow them and we harvest them, other than bringing the already harvested crop from whichever country where we do not know what was their GMO regime, you know. So that is where the problem is, because we may not know what did they do there, and at that point then our scientists and researchers are not in a better position to understand what was the process around this particular crop from growth to the time it has been harvested and brought to us here.
But so there are also people are saying that, I mean, and of GMOs are saying that we're going to have a proper branding system and processes whereby I'll have a choice to make to buy non-GMO or GMO food. But as a country, I also want you to comment on the same. Is this a route that we can pursue?
Even if we are branding, but let that be a culmination of our domestic efforts. Let our researchers do the research here and inform us here, you know, so that we don't ship in what has already been done elsewhere. That will kill that suspicion that Kenyans have around things, so that we will find it as a solution or as an alternative to the organic food. And then also I think let's allow our researchers to also grow, you know, in the sense that we are setting up these research farms, these research entities which are government owned. But what are they for? They are for offering solutions at times such as this one. You know, Churchill is from the JKUAT University, which has just come out with a very interesting farming method. They are using, they call it the membrane. You know, and they have tested it in Makueni under harsh conditions, and they've been able to grow a crop, and they have been able to harvest it, and that shows that it works. What if we empower such initiatives from our universities and our research entities, so that, as Dr. Churchill said earlier, we don't only depend on rain-fed agriculture, but we diversify the whole thing. And then by so doing, then we automatically find ourselves at a situation where we can feed the nation, and we do not have to even get into conversations around GMO, because our alternative methods will be able to suffice. But as it were, let government communicate effectively what they intend to do, how they are doing it, because it is always in the how that people become suspicious.
Because I can see time is really gone, and we have to wrap up this conversation. I want to give you to make your final case, and I want to start with you, Dr. Churchill. what would you advise the government, if you are in a position to do that, in a bid, number one, to realize its promises that it makes to the people, and number two, to help this country move forward?
Thanks, Brian. It's important first for government to appreciate that they're already in place. They have the mandate of the people. People are looking forward for their leadership, and there's a need for unity within the political discourse, so that the politicians are able to unite the country and continue healing the nation. Remember, a healed nation is part and parcel of moving the country forward. I mean, this is not the time that we should be talking about each other, talking about this politician saying this, that politician saying that. We are taking each other back to the campaign period. We need to work together, and there is need for the political class to unite in one cause and drive the development agenda of the nation moving forward. At this time, many of the citizens are, they are suffering. They want something that will lift their livelihoods and make them maintain their life in the wake of high cost of living. And that cannot be empty talk. That cannot be war of words amongst the political class. Yes.
Torostro.
I think the only thing that stood between Kenya Kwanza government and fulfilling their promises was the mandate of the people to lead the country, and that has been given to them. So I just would advise the government that all those things they promised in their manifesto are doable, and if those things are done, Kenya will change. In the next 5 years, we'll be talking about a totally different story. But if we anchor ourselves so much into politics than working, then we will get ourselves back at the same place. But finally, if it is possible, the government of the day can try to collapse their promises into about 4 issues or 5 issues that they will give priority, and Kenyans will see that the government is working.
Very good. Alenga and Saoke, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning, and of course for helping us with your thoughts, and we highly appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Asante sana.
All right.
Well, we're coming to the end of News Check this morning. Thank you very much, actually. Well, it is still morning. Thank you very much indeed for finding time to be with us here. Remember, Tamurini is coming up next. My name is O'Brien Kimani. Asante sana. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, because it's some minutes to afternoon, actually.